To go back to what we said about modern English, I didn't catch when you said that. When does modern English become readable, or when does it become modern English and not a different language entirely?
Well, it depends. I can't really pin down an exact year for you because it depends on how well you can like listen to things. And there's also things um, like regional spellings that are more similar to our modern spellings than other regional spellings, which contain like more archaic rules and forms and such. That can throw us off a little bit. And there's also just regional dialects that existed back then, which are much more understandable to us
Hmm.
than other dialects. But the general the general cutoff point is around like the 17th century,
Okay.
around that point. At that point, you're gonna have to go and like you're gonna have to like say what a whole bunch of times. And yeah, so beyond that, so that's like Shakespeare, King James, that sort of thing. That's like pretty much the edge that you can go.
Yeah. When does the modern alphabet become prevalent?
So that's a much longer story. So in order to go and explain the existence and the origin of the alphabet, we're going to have to go back some 2 to 3 thousand years. So with that, we have to go and talk a little about Egyptian hieroglyphs. Now, despite what a lot of people initially think about hieroglyphs, it's really not that hard to read because it's phonetic. There are signs which indicate individual sounds, sometimes signs which indicate multiple sounds. For instance, there's a sign that looks like a potato that makes the r sound, and there's like a sign for like a folded piece of cloth that makes a s sound. Um, but of course, it's not all sunshine and rainbows. There's some things called logographs where one sign represents an entire word, and you have to like kind of like memorize it, like Chinese characters. Um, and there were some miners around, I would say around like 1600 BC in Sinai. So it's like in northern Egypt. They were like, okay, fuck this. I'm not going to go and learn all this bullshit because that's expensive and it takes years. So what we're going to do is we're going to go and take this system, take the signs that represent individual sounds because that's a good idea. And we're going to use that and only that. And the signs, the physical shape of the signs became simpler over time. And now we have something called the Phoenician alphabet. This was a pretty big deal because it was the first fully alphabetic system, and it caught on. It went as far east as India, where it evolved into the Devanagari scripts and the Indian scripts that we see there today, and it went as far west as Italy. Um, and eventually it went north into Greece. And the Greeks looked at this system and they looked at it and they said, okay, this is pretty cool. It's really nice, but we already have a writing system. It's called Linear B. Probably don't know much about Linear B because no one gives a fuck about it. It's basically just a bunch of squiggles where one sign represents an entire syllable. Some pretty innovative stuff. But problem with that is that you can't individual signs can be a bit hard to interpret. So, for instance, the word for horse, as you would write it in this linear B script, is the sign for E and the sign for guo. All right. So, did they pronounce it as equal? No, they did not. They pronounced it as hikus. Completely different pronunciation. You just kind of have to know. And so they were like, okay, we'll try and use this Phoenician alphabet, but we're going to go and take some of these signs that we don't need because they represent sounds that we don't have in our language and use them to write down vowels. What the fuck does that mean? Well, it turns out the Phoenician alphabet didn't write down vowels, it only wrote down consonants. Now, that was fine and dandy for Phoenician, the language, but for the Greeks, it was like, no, 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 we're going to have to go and get those vowels in. And so they innovated and they came up with the first alphabetic system that had vowels. Wonderful stuff. And that Greek alphabet, it spread around into the various colonies that Greece had at the time, which at this point we're entering into like the first millennium BC, late, fuck, early first millennium BC. And we're seeing it travel out west into Italy. And that has evolved into the Etruscan alphabet at that point, which was used to write down Etruscan, which was a language that was spoken in Italy, and it died out around 200, around 2 AD. No one cares about it. But the Etruscan alphabet got pretty popular in Italy. It traveled north into Central Europe, and some Germanic barbarians picked it up, and we're going to say that they invented runes because that's what they did. But they also traveled a bit southern into, I would say, central Italy, and there were some people there called the Romans, and they needed a writing system, so they just used that, and that pretty much became the Latin alphabet that we see today. The rest is history.